Hello everyone. Welcome to Sleepy Crimes Hub. I'm here with you tonight to help you relax and slowly fall asleep. I know many of you are watching this video to rest your mind. So before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Now get comfortable, close your eyes if you like, take a deep breath and let go of the day. Let's gently begin with case 1. Serena Esmailzadeh grew up in Iran after losing her father at a young age. Raised by her mother alongside her older brother, she was known as a bright and ambitious student. She attended a specialized high school in Karaj designed for academically gifted students. Intelligent and curious about the world, she spoke Persian fluently and had also learned English and French, which allowed her to connect with a much wider audience beyond her own country. Outside of school, Serena built a presence online. She created videos where she spoke openly about everyday life, music she loved, food she enjoyed, school experiences, but she also touched on more serious subjects. She discussed the limitations placed on women in Iran and expressed her thoughts about personal freedom. In one of her recordings, after finishing her exams, she shared how liberating it felt to finally be free from pressure. In another, she reflected on how her generation was more aware of the world beyond Iran compared to those before them. In one of her final clips, shared on Telegram, she sang along to the song "Take Me to Church" by Hozier, adding that at times her homeland felt like a place of exile. In late September, Serena reportedly went out with friends to attend a public protest. She never returned home. Following her death, her videos began circulating widely online. The clip of her singing the Hozier song spread rapidly across social media, turning her voice into a symbol remembered far beyond her small circle of viewers. Authorities and human rights organizations reported that Serena Esmailzadeh suffered fatal injuries during a protest in the Gohardash neighborhood of Karaj, near her language school. Witnesses and sources from Amnesty International and Iran Human Rights stated that she was struck on the head multiple times with a baton, causing her to bleed to death before any medical help could reach her. Friends who had been with her at the protest later informed her family of the tragedy that evening. Following her death, Serena's family faced intense pressure from security and intelligence officials. They were urged to remain silent, particularly regarding contact with foreign media, and to publicly support the official version of events. These tactics mirrored the treatment of other families affected by the protests, highlighting the broader climate of fear and control surrounding the demonstrations. After news of Serena Esmailzadeh's death spread online, Iranian authorities moved quickly to control the narrative. Officials claimed she had died by suicide after falling from a building, contradicting reports from friends and human rights groups that she was killed during a protest. A state-linked news agency broadcast a video of her mother suggesting Serena had previously attempted suicide with pills, though the authenticity of this recording has been widely questioned. At her funeral, more than 50 security agents were reportedly present, strictly prohibiting any video recording. Sources say her mother told attendees that Serena had fallen from a roof, even without being asked. Her official death certificate was seized and never returned, and the family's communications were reportedly monitored. The family's lawyer was denied access to the investigation file, leaving them largely powerless in seeking answers about the circumstances surrounding her death. After Serena Esmailzadeh's death, her family never got her phone back. Posts on her Telegram channels were reportedly altered to portray her as depressed and suicidal, with some pinned messages even deleted. Her Instagram account was initially removed, and later multiple accounts were created in her name, including one using her original ID but without her previous posts. Her YouTube channel, however, remained a glimpse of the real Serena, a vibrant teenager who loved dancing, music, and pizza, and cared deeply about freedom. Her mother faced repeated obstacles in trying to see her daughter's body. Security forces reportedly mocked her, labeling Serena as a terrorist. When she was finally allowed to view the body, some reports claimed that the authorities asserted Serena had hanged herself at home, further complicating the truth surrounding her death. In 2023, Amnesty International UK marked what would have been Serena Ismailzadeh's 17th birthday on July 2nd, paying tribute to her life and legacy. Later, the Irish rock band U2 honored her memory through their song Song of the Future, released on their 2026 EP Days of Ash, as a heartfelt tribute to Serena and her fight for freedom. Case 2 Nika Shakarami was born on October 2nd, 2005, in Karamabad, located in Iran's Lorestan province, into a family. Very little is publicly known about her early life. Her family had roots in Karamabad, which was also her father's hometown. She was the second child in her family. Following her father's death, Nika moved to Tehran, where she lived with her aunt and worked at a coffee shop. Nika Shakarami joined the Mahsa Amini protests in September 2022, which erupted after Mahsa Amini's death while in police custody and focused on demanding greater women's rights in Iran. The demonstrations, organized by the Covenant and the Neighborhood Youth Alliance, drew hundreds of people to Keshavarz Boulevard in Tehran. On September 20th, Nika left her home around 1300 hours Universal Time Coordinated, carrying a bottle of water and a towel for protection against tear gas. She told her family she was visiting her sister, masking her participation in the protest. According to her family, the last message she sent to a friend indicated that she was being chased by security forces. As the crowd swelled, she became separated from her friends, who last saw her around 1500 hours Universal Time Coordinated. Later that evening, her Telegram and Instagram accounts were deleted, and her phone was turned off, cutting off all communication. On October 12th, CNN reported that her Telegram account had briefly been reactivated, likely by Iranian authorities, and her family confirmed that her phone was in the possession of the Tehran prosecutor's office. Iranian state media also claimed that authorities had accessed her Instagram direct messages, highlighting the government's surveillance of her digital activity. On October 27, 2022, CNN released footage showing Nika Shakarami's final hours during the protests. In one clip, she can be seen crouching behind cars in heavy traffic, whispering to a driver, don't move," signaling that she was being pursued and felt directly threatened. The source who provided the video to CNN reported witnessing Shakarami being apprehended and placed into a police van, capturing the moment that would mark her disappearance and the beginning of an international outcry over her fate. After losing contact with Nika Shakarami, her family immediately filed a missing persons report and began searching police stations and hospitals, while also sharing her pictures on social media in hopes of locating her. 10 days later, they were informed that someone matching her description had been discovered during forensic examinations of deceased protesters, and that her body was at the Karizak morgue, located within a local detention center. Shakarami's family were not allowed to see her body fully, only given a brief glance at her face for identification. Authorities claimed that she had died from a fall from a great height and even showed them a photograph of her body lying on a sidewalk, but her family found the image suspicious. In an interview, Shakarami's aunt revealed that her nose had been completely destroyed and her skull had been broken and disintegrated from multiple blows of a hard object, likely a baton. The family was also told that Nika had been kidnapped, interrogated by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and then detained briefly at Evin Prison, a facility notorious for reports of systematic torture and sexual abuse of prisoners. In 2024, an Iranian document leaked to the BBC provided a detailed account of the events leading up to and following Nika Shakarami's death. The BBC verified that the document was part of a 322-page case file concerning anti-government protesters from 2022. According to the document, Shakarami was captured by security forces in an undercover van and sexually assaulted. When she resisted, she was beaten to death with batons. The document also noted that she was taken to a temporary police camp and a detention center, but was not formally admitted to either location. Her captors were reportedly instructed to transfer her to Evin Prison, but instead they abandoned her body under the Yeger Imam Highway after reporting her death to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and receiving further orders. There is no evidence that those responsible faced any punishment, possibly due to their affiliation with Iranian Hezbollah. Shakarami's family transported her body to Karamabad for burial, planning the ceremony for October 2nd, which would have been her 17th birthday. However, the family stated that security forces pressured them to avoid holding a public funeral and to bury her in silence. Defying these orders, Shakarami's aunt posted on Twitter, inviting anyone interested to join in commemorating her last birthday. Shortly afterward, on October 2nd, her aunt and uncle were arrested at their home, and other family members were threatened with execution if they participated in protests. The remainder of the family was also coerced into agreeing not to organize any public funeral ceremony. Despite reaching an agreement that there would be no funeral, Shakarami's family claimed that authorities seized her body and secretly buried her in Hayat Ol Gaib, approximately 40 kilometers, 25 miles away, to avoid publicity and prevent her grave from becoming a site of pilgrimage for protesters. Iranian authorities have previously used the bodies of deceased protesters to intimidate and silence their families. Images of Shakarami's tombstone show a poem engraved on it. "Gave birth to you with blood and pain, gave you back to the motherland," emphasizing that her death was not a suicide, but a sacrifice for her country. On the 40th day after her death, a large crowd gathered at Shakarami's burial site, despite it being located in a small village far from the city. The mourners chanted protest slogans and sang a well-known Luri song, "Oh mother, mother, it's time to fight." Shakarami's mother addressed the crowd, saying, "I will forever be in agony for your sufferings, but I love you. When I see that pure seed of your thinking, freedom, courage, and honor blossoming in the hearts of others, I am happy and grateful." Hundreds of protesters gathered at Karamabad Cemetery on the day Shakarami's funeral would have been held, galvanized by the theft of her body. Activists accused the Iranian government of abusing, torturing, and ultimately killing Shakarami. News of her death prompted high school girls to join the anti-government protests in large numbers on October 4th, with some symbolically removing their hijabs in defiance of the authorities. David Gridden of BBC News described the participation of the schoolgirls as an unprecedented show of support. An article by Miriam Berger in the Washington Post characterized Shakarami's death and the authorities' attempted cover-up as giving the demonstrators another rallying cry. Mahmoud Amirmagadam, director of Iran Human Rights, stated, "The available evidence indicates the government's role in Nika Shakarami's murder. Unless the opposite is proven by an independent fact-finding commission under the supervision of the United Nations, the responsibility for Nika's murder, like the other victims of the current protests, rests with Ali Khamenei and the forces under his command." The death of Nika Shakarami and the theft of her body received widespread coverage in international media. She was also widely commemorated on social media, where her photo and name circulated, and her name became a hashtag used by the women's rights movement. BBC correspondent Nafizeh Khanavard honored Shakarami by posting a video on Twitter showing her standing on a stage, singing and laughing. In the clip, she performs an old Iranian love song from the 1968 film Sultan Galba. The BBC also shared videos of Shakarami speaking at protests prior to her death, highlighting her courage and activism. On October 2nd, 2022, Nika Shakarami's aunt, Atash Shakarami, and uncle, Mohsen Shakarami, were arrested in their homes after publicly sharing information about Nika's suspicious death on social media. They were allegedly coerced into making a false confession on state-run television at 8:30 a.m. local time on October 5th, 2022, claiming that Nika had committed suicide and that security forces were not involved in her death. Iranian state television aired interviews in which her aunt and uncle appeared to corroborate the government's narrative. During the broadcast, her aunt stated that Nika had fallen from a roof, while her uncle described her death as brutal and suspicious, but expressed doubt that the authorities were responsible. He attributed her death instead to social media radicalization and alleged that protesters from Lorestan had killed her to incite further protests in the province. Responding to previous statements by his sister, who had openly blamed the authorities, he dismissed her as not a political person. He also claimed that the decision to bury Nika in Vasion rather than Tehran had been made by the family out of concern that her killer in Tehran might disrupt the ceremony. The interviews with Shakarami's aunt and uncle were reportedly filmed while they were still in government custody. In footage of the interview with her uncle, the silhouette of an off-camera person can be heard whispering, "Say it, you scumbag," suggesting coercion. In an interview with BBC News, Shakarami's mother criticized the government's attempts to cover up its involvement in Nika's death. She stated that her brother and sister had been forced under duress to participate in the interviews, and that other family members were similarly intimidated to corroborate the official narrative. According to her mother, she had seen a medical report indicating that Shakarami had died on September 20th, the same day she went missing, as a result of blunt force trauma to the head. A death certificate issued by a Tehran cemetery also confirmed that Shakarami had died from multiple injuries caused by blows with a hard object. The authorities did not initially make any public statements regarding Nika, Shakarami's death. The state-owned Islamic Republic news agency, IRNA, reported that the authorities had launched their own investigation into the case. On October 4th, the Tasnim news agency, closely affiliated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, claimed that Shakarami had fallen from a building on September 21st and that 8 workers in the building had been arrested. Authorities used a similar suicide by jumping narrative in the case of another 16-year-old, Serena Esmailzadeh, who, according to Amnesty International, had died after reportedly being severely beaten by police with batons. Fars news agency released video footage purportedly showing Shakarami entering the building, though the person in the video could not be clearly identified. Dariush Shahunvand, the prosecutor in Lorestan province, denied any wrongdoing by Iranian authorities and asserted that Shakarami had been buried in her village, while blaming foreign enemies for creating a tense and fearful atmosphere after her death, without further clarification. According to IRNA, quoting the head of criminal prosecution of Tehran province, autopsy results showed traces of fractures on her body, and inquiry suggested that the person was thrown down. He also stated that there were no traces of bullets or shot, pellet, in the body. Case 3, Eliska, often called Elsie, was born in Chicago in the early years of the 20th century. Her mother, Karolina Vojakova, grew up in a small village in Bohemia, while her father, František Parabek, was a laborer from a nearby community. They married in Karolina's local Catholic church and soon started building their family together. Their first child, a son named Karel, arrived before the family decided to leave Europe in search of new opportunities in America. The Parabeks traveled with relatives, including Karolina's sister, and eventually settled in Chicago, where other extended family members had already established themselves. In their new home, Frank found work as a painter, while Karolina dedicated herself to caring for the children and running the household. In the beginning, the family maintained Catholic practices and had 2 of their older children baptized, but over time, they moved away from organized religion and embraced free-thinking ideas. Because of this shift, the younger children, including Elsie, were not baptized and their births were not formally registered, leaving the precise details of Elsie's birth unclear. Elsie was one of the youngest in a large family, and records suggest she had several siblings who did not survive early childhood, a tragic reality that shaped the family's daily life. Census records from the time describe her as a very young child, giving only a rough estimate of her age. When she died, she was recorded as being about 4 years old, though the exact date of her birth remains uncertain. These details give a glimpse into the early life of a young girl growing up in an immigrant family, navigating both the hopes and hardships of life in early 20th century Chicago. In various census records and newspaper reports from the time, particularly in the Chicago Daily News, the Parabek family name often appeared as Parobek. Frank Parabek was sometimes listed under the names Peter or John, while Karolina was occasionally called Mary. Elsie herself was referred to as Mary or Emily in some Illinois newspapers, including those in Rockford. On a quiet spring morning in Chicago, Elsie left her family home at South Albany Avenue, telling her mother she was going to visit her Aunt Julia Carolina's sister, who lived just a short walk away on South Troy Street. As she turned down 23rd Street toward Troy, Elsie ran into her young cousin Josie and a group of neighborhood children, all gathered to watch a street organ grinder performing near Julia's gate. When the organ grinder moved down the street, the children followed for a short distance, but Elsie eventually stayed behind. Hours passed, and when Elsie had still not arrived at her aunt's house, her mother began to worry. Since Elsie was known to have many friends nearby, they initially thought she might have gone to another neighbor's home or intended to stay overnight somewhere before returning the next day. But as evening approached with no sign of Elsie, concern turned into alarm. When Frank returned home from work that night, he immediately reported his daughter missing to the police at the Hemmond Street station. At first, authorities assumed she might simply be visiting friends, but by the following morning, with no word from Elsie, Captain John Mahoney personally took charge of the search, signaling the start of a frantic effort to find the young girl. In the early days of the search, local newspapers in Rockford reported that attention had turned to the Romani community. The tip came from a neighborhood boy, John Jarowski, who told detectives at the Maxwell Street Police Station, under the supervision of Inspector Stephen K. Healy, that he had spotted a gypsy wagon parked on Kedzie Avenue, just a block from Troy Street. Inside, he claimed to see two women holding a young girl. The Chicago American later expanded on the story, noting that the child appeared to be struggling, as if trying to escape while being held tightly. Some authorities even speculated that the incident might be linked to a Black Hand-style kidnapping, heightening the urgency and anxiety surrounding Elsie's disappearance. Investigators scoured the areas along the Des Plaines River near Kedzie, checking the various encampments where Romani families were known to stay. Locals reported that one wagon had broken camp and moved on the morning after Elsie vanished. The idea that she had been taken by Romani people gained traction because her disappearance closely mirrored the case of Lillian Wolfe, a young girl who had been found among Romani communities just a few years earlier. Elsie's father, desperate for any lead, offered his life savings as a reward, hoping to inspire anyone with information to come forward. Inspector Healy even ordered the drainage canals to be searched for her body, while the state's governor appealed to the public to help in the search. Around this time, Elsie's friend Emma Cubitt told the police she had last seen her playing near the organ grinder. Following this lead, detectives combed the Italian Quarter along West 14th and South Halsted Streets, where reports suggested a child matching Elsie's description had been seen near an organ grinder. Elsie's face soon appeared on the front page of the Chicago American, capturing the attention of the public. The image, enhanced by artists, was repeatedly featured in the newspaper, and later editions included photos of her parents and sister to draw further awareness to her disappearance. Detectives Joseph Comaris and Sheehan joined Elsie's father in tracing the wagons that had been seen leaving the area, initially believed to be heading toward Round Lake, a village northwest of Chicago where several Romani wagons had been spotted. Local farmers were asked to stay alert for any sign of the missing girl. As residents tried to question the families in the wagons and search them, the groups frequently broke camp, moving on to Volo, Illinois. There, witnesses reported seeing a child who looked similar to Elsie but appeared disoriented and partially hidden under a blanket. Attempts to investigate were again thwarted when the group moved on to McHenry, Illinois. When authorities finally located the wagons there, the child they saw turned out not to be Elsie. Meanwhile, police under Captain Mahoney continued a systematic search closer to home, dragging the drainage canals near Elsie's neighborhood in hopes of uncovering any trace of her, conducting sweeps on multiple days. Throughout the search, there were multiple occasions when a child resembling Elsie was discovered in various camps, causing her father to briefly believe he had found his daughter. Even weeks into the search, he was still overcome with hope. At one point, when a little girl who somewhat matched Elsie's description was spotted near South Halsted, he fell to his knees and prayed. Authorities at the time speculated that Elsie may have been taken because of the fascination that some wandering communities had with children who had light hair and blue eyes. Elsie herself was described as small, with golden curls, blue eyes, rosy cheeks, and dimples, wearing a red dress, black stockings, lace-up shoes, and a matching red hat when she disappeared. Passers-by often commented on her charm and beauty, and she stood out among other children in the neighborhood. Despite numerous tips and sightings, including a report of a child being escorted to a hotel in Western Springs and investigations in Cherry Valley, no confirmed trace of Elsie was found. Authorities also received a potential ransom note, which they neither fully confirmed nor dismissed. Meanwhile, in the days following her disappearance, her younger brother was seen digging in the street near their home, leading to speculation that Elsie might have fallen into a construction site pit, though workers dismissed the possibility. Residents in the surrounding areas continued to report glimpses of light-skinned girls traveling with Romani groups, keeping the mystery of Elsie's disappearance alive. About 2 weeks after Elsie vanished, an 11-year-old girl named Lillian Wolf came forward to assist in the search. Lillian had herself been abducted by wandering Romani people 4 years prior and held for nearly a week, during which she was forced to beg, until a farmer discovered her following a wagon near Momence, Illinois. Drawing on her own experience, she described the typical behavior of her captors and offered to guide a small rescue party in hopes of finding Elsie. As part of the search, authorities brought in Elijah George, known locally as a leader among the Romani, from Argyle, Wisconsin, to Joliet. However, he was unable or unwilling to provide useful information and was released. Inspector Healy renewed efforts to drag drainage canals and inspect wells and other potential hazards where Elsie might have fallen. On April 22nd, Governor Dineen made a public appeal in the Chicago American, urging the entire community to assist in locating Elsie. That same day, a tip came into Trevor, Wisconsin, about a blonde girl seen in a nearby Romani camp. Town Marshal John Mutz and a local saloon keeper, Carl Zdenek, visited the camp and communicated with the child in Czech, believing she might be Elsie. A resident from McHenry, Mrs. Alice Gould, also identified the girl as potentially Elsie and noted that attempts had been made to abduct other children in the area, adding urgency to the ongoing search. By late April, authorities were growing increasingly convinced that Elsie's disappearance had taken a tragic turn. Lieutenant John Costello of the Himmon Street Station told reporters that every possible lead in the alleged kidnapping had been pursued. He feared that Elsie had been harmed and might no longer be alive, with her body hidden somewhere in a vacant house or abandoned barn. Detectives were dispatched to search empty buildings, sheds, elevators, and basements in the South Albany Avenue area, some even carrying spades to dig up recently disturbed soil. Inspector Healy joined the effort along with Detectives Perry and Egan. At the same time, 2 officers were sent to the outskirts of the city following a tip that Costello declined to reveal publicly. Meanwhile, Captain Stephen Wood kept watch on all Romani wagons and sent notices to police in nearby towns, including Belvedere, Rockford, and Janesville, Wisconsin, asking them to be alert for any sign of Elsie. Despite all these efforts, officials feared the worst, that Elsie might have suffered an accident, been killed, or even held somewhere unable to speak, leaving her family and the city in a state of growing despair. On the same day, a neighbor came forward to tell police that she had last seen Elsie that morning around 11, still near the organ grinder and talking with a man across the street whom the neighbor did not recognize. The very next day, the Chicago Daily News highlighted the search in a full column, describing it as one of the most extensive efforts ever undertaken for a missing child. 20 officers and around 100 volunteers joined Lieutenant Costello's team, canvassing roughly a mile around the Parabec residence. The investigation drew widespread attention not only because of the scale and dedication of the police, but also because so many children from the neighborhood participated. Many of these young volunteers were not merely casual acquaintances. They considered themselves friends of Elsie, and they eagerly offered to explore hidden corners, alleys, and other out-of-the-way spots in hopes of finding her or clues about her disappearance. Towards the end of April, Inspector Healy dispatched a detective to Zion City, Illinois, following a tip from the local deputy sheriff. Once again, a child who looked like Elsie was spotted at a gypsy camp, but it turned out not to be her. By the next day, Chicago's superintendent of schools, Mrs. Ella Flagg Young, asked children across the city to help search their neighborhoods during spring break. In a desperate move, Frank Parobeck consulted a psychic who claimed that Elsie was in Argo, Wisconsin, likely meaning Argyle. Officers sent to the area by local politician Charles J. Vapica were unable to find her, and the search continued to move back and forth across Illinois, Wisconsin, and even Minnesota, yielding no results. A few days after Elsie went missing, Frank began receiving anonymous letters that insulted and blamed him. Written in English, which he could not read, he relied on neighbors to translate their messages. The letters suggested that someone who disliked the Parobeck family had hidden Elsie and accused her parents of mistreatment. Angered by these claims, Frank burned the letters. Nevertheless, Detectives Zauer and Zalaski tried to pursue the lead, following up wherever possible in the hope it might point to Elsie's whereabouts. The Czech community in Chicago quickly came together to support the Parobeck family in their search for Elsie. Czech-speaking police officers were assigned to work in plain clothes on the case, while other multilingual officers, Polish, German, Irish, and English speakers, were also brought in to help question every possible witness in the neighborhood and the camps. The Women's Auxiliary of Club Bohemia joined the effort, organizing a citywide chain letter that asked recipients to send copies to everyone they knew, spreading news of Elsie's disappearance far and wide. Several Czech American politicians also became involved, and the Bohemian Charitable Association met with Mayor Carter Harrison, Jr., announcing a reward for Elsie's return and committing to raise additional funds. Mayor Harrison himself contributed and sent a special police squad from City Hall to assist, while a separate detachment coordinated with the Lawndale Avenue station alongside him and street officers. Chicago Alderman Anton Cermak pledged that if Elsie was not found before the next city council meeting, he would push the council to increase the reward. At the time, state law did not allow a reward for kidnapping cases, only for murder, but on April 26th, Governor Dineen indicated he intended to ask the legislature to change the law so the state of Illinois could offer an official reward in addition to private contributions. Judge Adolph J. Sabbath took a personal interest in Elsie Parobeck's disappearance, meeting with her family several times and contributing to the growing reward fund for her return. Initially giving $25, he later increased his donation to $100 and worked with local Czech societies to find ways to encourage further contributions. In the meantime, police continued to follow numerous tips of girls wearing red dresses seen with gypsy groups, though by early May, investigators were beginning to doubt these leads and refocused on searching canals, wells, and other possible accident sites. Judge Sabbath criticized the authorities for what he considered a lackluster search, noting that Elsie's family had limited means and could not support an extensive investigation. The judge was inundated with letters from across the country, many offering money for the reward, including a detailed account from a man in Arkansas reporting the presence of a large Romani group at a local station, none of whom appeared to match Elsie. At the same time, Detectives Zauer and Zalaski investigated the origin of the threatening letters Elsie's father had received, while Lieutenant Costello, with Inspector Healy's backing, maintained that Elsie likely fell into a drainage canal near the Kedzie Avenue Bridge and had not been abducted or harmed by others, suggesting the letter writer may have witnessed the incident. By May 7th, authorities had investigated over 25 Romani camps, following many false leads. Yet Captain Mahoney publicly stated his belief that Elsie had died, although searches for her body would continue. On the same day, Judge Sabbath took the unusual step of ordering a review of Frank and Carolina Parobeck's personal history, seeking any possible motive that might have led someone to harm or abduct their daughter. On the morning of May 9th, 1911, George T. Scully, an electrical engineer, and several colleagues of the Lockport power plant near Joliet, several dozen miles from Chicago, noticed something floating in the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal. At first, they assumed it was an animal that had wandered in from nearby farms, but after several hours they realized it was a human body and sent a boat to retrieve it. Undertaker William Goodale examined the body and remarked that it closely matched the description of Elsie Parobeck, noting the shade and texture of her hair, the style of her stockings, and the fabric and color of a red dress. He estimated that the body had been in the water for several weeks, though it showed only moderate signs of decomposition. Some reports described the body as badly decomposed, but no obvious injuries or signs of trauma were visible. Authorities were promptly notified, and Police Lieutenant Costello brought the news to the Parabec household. Carolina, Elsie's mother, cried out in anguish, pleading that her daughter still be alive. Later that night, Frank Parabec was taken to the Goodale Funeral Home to examine the body. He initially hesitated, saying the clothing looked like Elsie's, but that the face was unrecognizable and suggested only Carolina could confirm. Witnesses later reported that upon closer inspection, Frank recognized his daughter and broke down in tears, overwhelmed by the confirmation of her tragic fate. The next morning, Carolina arrived at the funeral home by trolley, her heart heavy with worry. Upon seeing the body, she immediately recognized her daughter, whispering through tears, "It's you, my darling. Thank God we found you and you're not lost to the gypsies." For the following hour, she moved restlessly between sitting and pacing, with Frank holding her hands, both of them weeping and murmuring prayers together. William Goodale, the undertaker who had followed Elsie's disappearance closely in the newspapers, shared his observations with the police. He noted that the body seemed to have been in the water for roughly a month, aligning with the timeline of Elsie's disappearance. Every detail of her clothing matched what Elsie had worn the day she went missing, and there were no personal adornments, just as reported. The only minor uncertainty was the precise color of her eyes, but aside from that, all descriptions aligned perfectly. In the wake of this confirmation, preparations for an official inquest were made swiftly. A jury was convened, including F.W. Wurst, Christian Radchuro, John A. Walter, William Woodale, Edwin Murray, and Patrick O'Brien, with Coroner William Wunderlich of Will County overseeing the proceedings. As the post-mortem examination commenced, Frank Parabec was called to testify first. Ignoring the coroner's formal questions, he spoke with raw urgency, convinced that his daughter had been deliberately killed. Through a translator, he declared that he believed the gypsies had taken Elsie, and when they realized the family was pursuing them, they murdered her and disposed of her body in the canal. At these words, Carolina's grief overwhelmed her. She bolted from the funeral parlor, crying out, "My Elsie is dead. She was murdered." Her husband and Detective Zalaski attempted to soothe her, but she ran up and down the street, her anguish drawing a crowd of onlookers. Between sobs, she insisted that she had known for weeks that Elsie had been taken and killed. Frank finally managed to calm her enough to help her board a trolley car back home, his own face streaked with tears. Meanwhile, the coroner addressed the room with measured gravity. "This case has drawn such public attention that a thorough examination is warranted," he stated. "We will not conduct a hasty inquest. The jury will withhold judgment until the autopsy is complete. We will carefully examine the child's stomach and lungs. The father's accusation of murder cannot be dismissed. It is entirely plausible." Two doctors, E.A. Kingston and W.R. Paddock, examined Elsie's body and confirmed that water had not entered her lungs, ruling out drowning. Dr. Kingston stated that Elsie had clearly been violently attacked and killed before her body was placed in the canal, while Dr. Paddock noted that there was strong evidence she had suffered wounds prior to death. Later, Lieutenant Costello told reporters that the child had been mistreated, implying that her death was unlikely to have been caused by the wandering groups previously suspected. Inspector Healy added, "There is no doubt she was subjected to cruel abuse, and recognizing this simplifies the investigation for the authorities." The examiners also identified deep cuts along the left side of Elsie's face, although initial reports mentioned bruising around her throat, suggesting choking. Further analysis by Doctors E.R. Leecount and Warren H. Hunter from the coroner's office concluded that Elsie had been suffocated rather than strangled and found no other clear signs of violent injury on her body. Despite these clarifications, many newspapers continued to describe her death as strangulation. Official records listed the cause of death as unknown. Coroner Peter Hoffman agreed with Frank Parabek's assessment that Elsie's death likely involved foul play. The coroner concluded that Elsie had likely been suffocated, possibly with a hand pressed over her mouth, and urged authorities to continue the investigation. Inspector Healy immediately assigned detectives to uncover the full circumstances of her death. Speaking to the Chicago Inter-Ocean, he said that 40 detectives were actively working under the assumption that the perpetrators lived near the Parabek home. We are reviewing every aspect of the Parabek's lives since they moved to Chicago to identify any possible enemies, he stated. I would be surprised if the criminals are not caught within a week. He also told the Chicago Tribune that while the police had a few ideas, there was nothing concrete enough to share publicly, and that he planned to assign more officers to the case the next day. Lieutenant Costello continued following up on the mysterious letters that Frank Parabek had received. Meanwhile, the New York Times reported the theory of suffocation as though it were an established fact. That evening, Carolina had regained some composure and spoke to reporters after returning home, surrounded by friends and neighbors. She said she had long suspected the worst. Even before the doctors confirmed that Elsie's lungs were free from water and found signs suggesting strangulation, I knew my child had been killed. Since the second week of her disappearance, a clear image of what happened has been in my mind. I am certain that when the truth comes to light, it will show that she was choked to death, roughly a week after being taken while on her way to visit her auntie. She urged the authorities to find those responsible and bring them to justice. After the inquest, Elsie's body was returned home, and her uncle, Frank Trampota, oversaw the funeral preparations. Carolina explained to Judge Sabbath that the family had spent all their savings during the search and had no funds for a proper burial. Moved by their plight, Judge Sabbath provided a check to cover initial expenses and promised to help raise additional funds. Friends and community members also rallied to support the Parabeks. Mrs. Sophie Johans, for example, organized a benefit gathering and collected contributions from Bohemian communities on the West Coast, raising a significant sum for the family. Elsie Parabek's funeral took place on the morning of May 12, 1911, on the lawn of the Parabek home, drawing an immense crowd. Estimates vary, with some sources reporting around 2,000 to 3,000 attendees, while the Chicago Inter-Ocean claimed as many as 5,000 people had gathered. Long before the service began, Albany Avenue and the Parabek backyard were filled with mourners, spilling onto balconies and porches of nearby homes, as no local hall could accommodate the turnout. When offered a hall for the ceremony, Frank Parabek declined, saying, "They have come to say goodbye to my Elsie. Don't let them be disappointed." Officers from the Hinman Street station were brought in to maintain order and prevent the crowd from overwhelming the fence. Elsie's white coffin rested on brass stands and was surrounded by fragrant lilies of the valley, roses, and carnations sent by Mayor Harrison, Judge Sabbath, and other city officials. 8 young girls dressed in white, including Josie Trampota and her sister Mary, carried large floral arrangements and circled the coffin in a solemn guard. A makeshift platform of chairs and a board held hundreds of additional flowers. Carolina sat at the head of the coffin, grieving quietly, while Frank and the other children stood close by, paying their final respects. Because the Parabeks did not practice Catholicism but followed free-thinker beliefs, the funeral did not include traditional prayers. Instead, Rudolf Yarmolenko, the editor of the Bohemian Chicago Daily Svornost, led the service. He emphasized the importance of supporting law enforcement in their pursuit of Elsie's killers. As the coffin was being moved into the hearse, Carolina pleaded to see her daughter's face one final time, but her family gently convinced her to let it go. The procession then moved to Bohemian National Cemetery, with most of the mourners following behind. At the cemetery, Senka addressed the crowd again, reminding them of the community's role in seeking justice. Frank Parabek spoke with quiet determination. "My little girl rests in peace, and nothing can touch her now, but I will not rest until those responsible for her death are held accountable." Given the location where Elsie's body was recovered, detectives turned their attention to Joseph Canesti. According to reports in the Rockford Republic, Police working under Captain Stephen Wood identified Canesty as a prime suspect. Described as a solitary bohemian with a beard, he had a reputation as a hermit peddler and was said to have lured young girls to a small shack near the drainage canal, just over a mile from the Parabec home. Neighbors claimed he was often seen loitering near the area. During a search of his hut, investigators discovered a green hair ribbon, which they intended to show to Elsie's mother for identification, along with signs of a shallow hole and an old hemp sack that might have been used to conceal a body. The property's owner, Mrs. David Shaughnessy, told authorities that she had previously complained to Canesty about children being around his home and had evicted him on May 9th. Tragically, the following day, Canesty ended his own life by stepping in front of a train. 5 days later, the authorities officially cleared him of any involvement in Elsie's death. On May 13th, authorities discovered the body of a well-dressed man floating in the canal near Willow Springs, a short distance from Lockport and not far from Albany Avenue. He carried no official identification, only a small Catholic prayer card in Polish with the name Sig Hoff written on it. Detectives considered the possibility that he might somehow be connected to Elsie's disappearance. On that same day, investigators also received an anonymous letter claiming the writer had seen a young girl walking along the canal with a young man on the morning Elsie vanished. In addition, attention turned to another isolated man living in a small shack near the canal. Described as a deeply religious, eccentric individual, Mr. Kinsella was believed by neighbors to be unstable. When detectives approached his home, he suddenly bolted, behaving as though he might reach for a firearm. Officers called out to assure him they only wished to ask questions, firing warning shots into the air. Despite a tense 3-mile pursuit through gullies and thick underbrush, Kinsella managed to escape into the forest, leaving police unable to question him further. On May 15th, Frank Parabec reported to the police that he had encountered a man he did not know who claimed to have seen Elsie on the afternoon of April 8th, walking along Kedzie Avenue, just south of 28th Street, hours after she was believed to have been taken by the gypsies. Intrigued by this tip, Lieutenant Costello instructed his detectives to locate the man and verify his account. Previously, the last reported sighting of Elsie had her near South Troy Street, close to her aunt's home, walking toward the canal. If this new witness was telling the truth, Elsie had only been a few blocks from a nearby bridge when she disappeared. Despite the coroner's repeated assertions that Elsie had been murdered, Lieutenant Costello had begun to consider the possibility that her death was a tragic accident, that she might have simply fallen into the canal. This theory persisted even though Inspector Healy had already ordered the canals and drainage ditches to be thoroughly dragged during the earlier search. Some confusion had emerged during the initial medical examinations. The first doctor to examine Elsie's body on the night it was recovered initially told Lieutenant Costello that she had drowned and showed no visible signs of abuse, a conclusion Costello relayed to the family. However, a follow-up autopsy the next day contradicted this early assessment, showing that Elsie had not drowned and suggesting instead that she may have been suffocated. Detectives cast a wide net over the southwestern part of Chicago, focusing on a house near Madison and Roby Streets, searching for a former boarder who had once stayed with the Parabec family. At the same time, they pursued leads regarding the anonymous, threatening letters Frank Parabec had received. Despite these efforts, neither the former boarder, the mysterious letter writer, nor the unknown man who had spoken to Frank were ever located. Tragically, 2 years after the funeral, Frank Parabec passed away at the age of 45. Carolina survived him by over a decade, dying in December 1927. The couple were laid to rest alongside Elsie in Bohemian National Cemetery. Their family plot a quiet testament to the little girl's brief life. Although Elsie's disappearance and death had once captured the full attention of the city and its press, her story gradually faded from public memory, until it unexpectedly resurfaced in connection with the work of the reclusive artist Henry Darger decades later. In 1973, art historian Michael Bonesteel, studying Darger's epic manuscript The Story of the Vivian Girls, noticed repeated references to a character named Annie Ehrenberg, a young girl who had met a shocking and heroic fate at the hands of her captors. Darger's diary revealed that he had been searching for an image of a little girl lost long ago, which he described as having appeared in a Chicago newspaper during the spring or summer of 1911. Bonesteel's archival research confirmed that Darger was unknowingly drawing on Elsie Parebec's story. Some details in his illustrations, such as a blonde girl with a distinctive hair ribbon and the collar of her dress, closely mirrored photographs of Elsie. Within Darger's imaginary world, children were frequently kidnapped and mistreated by adults, but brave young heroines like Annie Ehrenberg and the Vivian girls formed daring rescue squads to save them, echoing the tragedy and resilience reflected in Elsie's real-life story. Case 4: on a cold morning in mid-February 1982, an Arizona State trooper was performing a routine search along Interstate 40 near Williams when he stumbled upon a grim scene. Hidden beneath the shade of cedar tree at mile marker 151.8, the body of a young woman lay face down, partially decomposed. The discovery was made while the officer was initially looking for a tire that had fallen off a passing truck. But what he found was far more disturbing. The victim was dressed only in a pair of blue jeans, roughly a size 8 or 9, marked with the brand name Seasons. Nearby lay a white sweater adorned with thin stripes of red or maroon, a white bra, and a folded handkerchief. The jeans showed signs of damage. Torn belt loops suggested the woman had been dragged a significant distance, approximately 25 feet, away from the roadway to where she ultimately was left. There were no shoes or socks accompanying her remains, leaving a haunting sense of vulnerability. The scene hinted at a violent and deliberate act, and the young woman's identity, along with the circumstances that led to her death, remained a chilling mystery. The quiet stretch of desert road became the starting point of an investigation into a crime that would draw attention across the state and beyond. Valentine Sally was believed to stand around 5 feet 4 to 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighing between 120 and 125 pounds. Witnesses who had seen her alive described her eyes as blue, and her hair measured roughly 9.5 inches, with a shade ranging from blonde to strawberry blonde. Her body showed signs of past injuries. Irregular, well-healed scars were visible on the top of her left foot, one measuring 3.5 centimeters and another about 1.4 centimeters in length, while a diagonal scar on the back of her lower thigh measured approximately 3.5 centimeters. Additionally, she had a few moles on her chest, just above the right breast. Valentine Sally's death was estimated to have occurred around 2 weeks before her remains were discovered. Due to decomposition and damage from animals and insects around her head and neck, the exact cause of death could not be precisely determined. Investigators, however, suspected she had been suffocated or asphyxiated, as there were no other visible injuries and her hyoid bone remained intact. Her right ear had been lost to scavenging wildlife. The autopsy revealed that one of her lower left molars had been drilled for a root canal about a week before her death, with traces of dissolved aspirin still present, indicating she had been experiencing dental pain. Several of her adult teeth had not yet erupted. A Northern Arizona University student reported to the Doe Network that on February 2nd, 1982, he had given a ride to a young girl who matched Valentine Sally's description near Cordish Junction. She told him she lived in Phoenix with friends, worked as a dishwasher, and needed to travel to New Jersey to deal with family matters. She planned to stop at the Little America truck stop in Flagstaff to try to hitch a ride with a trucker heading east. 2 days later, on February 4th, a witness named Patty Wilkins saw Valentine Sally at her family's Monte Carlo truck stop with an older truck driver. Wilkins was concerned about the teenager being with an adult at that hour and asked if she felt safe or wanted to stay at the truck stop. Valentine Sally chose to remain with the man. The driver ordered breakfast, but Valentine Sally declined to eat due to a toothache, prompting Wilkins to crush an aspirin and apply it to the sore tooth. Investigators later determined that Valentine Sally likely died within hours of this encounter, as the aspirin remained in the tooth when her body was found. Wilkins was able to confirm her identity when detectives showed her photos of the clothing recovered at the scene. In the summer of 1984, Valentine Sally was mistakenly identified as Melody Eugenia Cutlip, a runaway from Istatchua, Florida, who had been reported missing by her mother in 1980. Forensic analysis, including bite mark comparisons and a facial reconstruction, initially suggested the victim could be Cutlip. Despite this, Cutlip's mother refused to claim the body, insisting that the remains were not her daughter. 2 years later, in 1986, Cutlip was located alive and returned to her family in Jacksonville, Florida. After Valentine Sally's discovery, multiple attempts were made to recreate her likeness. Just 4 days following the recovery of her body, a sketch was produced using descriptions provided by Patty Wilkins. Later, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children developed 2 facial reconstructions using CT scans of her skull. Additionally, California-based artist Carl Koppelman created his own reconstruction, also derived from the scans, to aid in identifying the young woman. Patty Wilkins described the truck driver seen with Valentine Sally as likely being in his 50s, of medium build, and standing around 5'8" to 5'10". He wore a two-toned, checkered leather vest and a black felt cowboy hat adorned with a peacock feather. Using her eyewitness account, authorities later produced a sketch of the man. Some online researchers have speculated that this description could resemble serial killer Royal Russell Long, though no official link has been confirmed. Long, who had traveled along Interstate 40 following the 1981 murders of Cinda Pallett and Charlotte Kinsey, was convicted for those crimes in 1985 and died of a heart attack in prison in 1993 without ever confessing to Valentine Sally's murder. In 2005, the investigation into Valentine Sally was taken up by the Cold Case Squad, a specialized unit within the Coconino County Sheriff's Office made up of volunteers with law enforcement experience. The lead investigators, Chuck Jones, Jana White, and Joe Sumner, focused on keeping the case active, with Jones, a retired FBI agent, playing a key role before stepping down due to health concerns. Inspired by the success of using genetic genealogy to catch the Golden State Killer, the team partnered with genealogist Barbara Ray Venner to apply similar techniques to identify Valentine Sally. A blood sample from the victim was processed to extract DNA, which was then run through genealogy databases designed for public family tree research. The analysis revealed a match to a cousin, and the investigators traced the family line to a branch in St. Louis, Missouri, containing several girls. Through database searches, they found that all except one had current records. The missing girl had disappeared from official record around 1979, had a history of running away, and had juvenile records that were never expunged. The Cold Case Squad concluded that this missing girl was indeed Valentine Sally, finally giving her identity to the decades-old case. On February 22, 2021, authorities with the Coconino County Sheriff's Office confirmed that Valentine Sally had been identified as 17-year-old Carolyn Celeste Eaton from Bellefontaine Neighbors, Missouri. Reports indicate that around Christmas of 1981, Eaton had a confrontation at home when her family discovered her with 2 unfamiliar men, after which she left and vanished. It is believed that she traveled to Arizona by hitchhiking. The case surrounding Eaton's murder remains active, with investigators following up on any leads that emerge. One key focus is identifying the truck driver last seen with her. Patty Wilkins, the witness who had helped Eaton shortly before her death, urged law enforcement, "Find out who did it and let me go stomp on his toes, okay?" Case 5 Joubert was born in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and grew up with his sister. After his parents divorced when he was young, he and his sister moved with their mother to a rundown apartment in Portland, Maine. He was not allowed to visit his father, which fostered a deep resentment toward his controlling mother. His high school band teacher and mentor, Rich Petra, recalled that Joubert felt his mother was cold and extremely manipulative, describing him as being kept under a very tight leash. Although Joubert excelled academically and consistently made the honor roll, he became a target for some of his peers. Bigger boys often bullied him for appearing meek, shy, or helpless. His former Spanish teacher, Francesca Bergen, described him as remaining a little boy throughout high school and noted that while many students who were picked on managed to defend themselves, Joubert never did. She wondered if he believed he deserved the constant teasing, shoving, and name-calling he endured. To cope with his feelings of isolation, Joubert became more active in school and community activities, playing clarinet in the marching band, running on the track team, and joining the Cub Scouts. Around this time, his dark fantasies began to escalate, imagining harming strangers or restraining anyone who resisted him. A later psychiatric report noted that he admitted to feeling pleasure from the despair of others, expressing a cold, calculated mindset with the thought that if you're going to do it, get it over with. When he was 13, he stabbed a young girl with a pencil and felt sexually stimulated when she cried out in pain. The next day, armed with a razor blade, he slashed another girl as he biked past. He was never identified or charged in either offense. In another incident, he beat up another boy and nearly strangled him to the point of unconsciousness. Having been bullied throughout his youth, Joubert relished the physical and mental power of this dominance and began to consider casually stabbing or slashing others. He ultimately graduated from Cheverus High School, a Catholic secondary school in Portland. In 1981, 11-year-old Richard "Ricky" Stetson went out for a jog along the Back Cove Trail in Portland, Maine, but never returned home. When he failed to come back by evening, his parents alerted the police, and the following day, a motorist discovered his body beside Interstate 295. He had been attacked, stabbed, strangled, bitten, and partially undressed. A suspect was arrested, but the bite marks did not match his teeth, and he was released after more than a year in custody. The case then went cold, with no new leads emerging for over a year. 13-year-old Danny Joe Eberly disappeared while delivering newspapers in Bellevue, Nebraska, after completing only a few stops on his route. His brother remembered being followed by a white man in a tan car in previous days, and Eberly's bicycle and remaining papers were later found at his next delivery address, showing no signs of struggle. Joubert would later admit that he had approached Eberly, drawn a knife, and forced him to follow him to his car, driving him to a remote gravel road outside town. After a 3-day search, Eberly's body was discovered in tall grass several miles from his bicycle, stripped to his undershorts, with his hands and feet bound and his mouth sealed with surgical tape. Knife wounds and evidence of torture, including 9 stab wounds inflicted by Joubert, revealed the brutality of the attack, and because it involved a kidnapping, the FBI took over the investigation. The investigation into Eberly's murder followed several leads, including a young man arrested for molesting 2 boys about a week after the crime. Although he failed a polygraph and had a false alibi, he did not match the FBI's profile of the killer and was released for lack of evidence. Other known pedophiles in the area were questioned, but the case eventually went cold. Months later, 12-year-old Christopher Walden disappeared in Papillion, Nebraska, only a few miles from where Eberly's body had been found. Witnesses again reported seeing a white man in a tan car, and Joubert would later confess that he had approached Walden while he walked, brandished the sheath of his knife, and forced him into his vehicle. After driving Walden to a remote set of railway lines outside town, Joubert forced him to strip down to his undershorts. When Walden refused to lie in the snow, a brief struggle ensued before Joubert overpowered him and stabbed him. He then slashed the boy's throat with such force that Walden was nearly decapitated. 2 days later, Walden's body was discovered several miles from town. While the crime bore similarities to Eberly's murder, there were notable differences. Walden had not been bound, had been better concealed, and appeared to have been killed immediately after the abduction. On January 11th, 1984, a local preschool teacher reported to police that she had seen a young man driving suspiciously in the area of the murders. Accounts differ on whether the car was simply passing through or loitering, but when the driver noticed the teacher writing down his license plate, he stopped and threatened her, though she managed to escape. The vehicle, while not tan, was traced to a rental rented by John Joubert, an enlisted radar technician stationed at Offutt Air Force Base, as his own tan Chevrolet Nova sedan was in the shop for repairs. A search warrant was executed on Joubert's barracks room, where authorities found rope matching the type used to bind Danny Joe Eberly. The FBI determined that the unusual rope had been manufactured for the U.S. military in South Korea. During questioning, Joubert admitted that he had acquired it from the scoutmaster of the troop, where he served as an assistant. FBI profiler Robert K. Ressler, along with Docter and Burgess, reviewed the cases of the two Nebraska boys and created a profile that matched Joubert in every detail. While presenting this case at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, a police officer from Portland, Maine, noticed striking similarities to a local case that had occurred while Joubert lived in Maine before joining the Air Force. Bite mark analysis confirmed that Joubert was responsible for the Maine murder as well as the Nebraska killings. Investigators came to believe that he had joined the military to leave Maine after the murder of Ricky Stetson. Further investigation in Maine uncovered additional violent acts committed by Joubert between the pencil stabbing of a 9-year-old girl in 1979 and Stetson's murder in 1982. In 1980, he had slashed a 9-year-old boy and a female teacher in her mid-20s, both of who were seriously injured but survived, according to Ressler's findings. Joubert ultimately confessed to murdering the two Nebraska boys and was charged with their killings on January 12, 1984. He initially pleaded not guilty, but later changed his plea to guilty. Psychiatric evaluations described him as having obsessive-compulsive disorder, sadistic tendencies, and schizoid personality disorder, and determined that he had not been psychotic at the time of the crimes. A panel of 3 judges sentenced him to death for both murders. Later, in 1990, after bite mark evidence linked him to the murder of Ricky Stetson in Maine, he was also sentenced to life imprisonment there, as the state did not have the death penalty. In 1995, Joubert challenged his death sentences by filing a writ of habeas corpus with the United States District Court for the District of Nebraska, arguing that the aggravating factor of exceptional depravity was unconstitutionally vague. The district court initially agreed, but the state appealed, and the United States Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit overturned the decision, noting that his sadistic behavior in torturing Eberly and Walden clearly met the standard. Joubert was executed by electric chair in Nebraska in 1996, becoming the second person put to death in the state since the death penalty was reinstated. Before his execution, he issued a final statement apologizing for his crimes and asking the families of his victims and the people of Nebraska for forgiveness, though he expressed uncertainty about whether his death would bring any peace. His last meal included pizza with green peppers and onions, strawberry cheesecake, and black coffee. An appeal later questioned whether the electric chair constituted cruel and unusual punishment, noting that Joubert developed a 4-inch blister on the top of his head and additional blistering above both ears during the execution. Case April 6 Tinsley was a second-grade student at Fairfield Elementary School and an active member of the children's choir at Faith United Methodist Church. On Good Friday, she was spending the afternoon playing with 2 friends, moving from house to house in her neighborhood. Around mid-afternoon, she realized she had left her umbrella behind and went back to retrieve it. It was at that moment, around 3 o'clock, that April disappeared, leaving her friends behind and vanishing without a trace. Her sudden disappearance alarmed her family and neighbors, sparking an immediate search that involved both local authorities and community members. In the investigation that followed, it was later revealed that John Miller, who would eventually plead guilty, had planned to abduct a child, though he had not known April prior to that day. He lured her into his car and took her to a secluded location. The details of what happened afterward were horrifying, and her body was ultimately discovered in a remote area, prompting grief and outrage across the community. The case highlighted the dangers that children could face even in seemingly safe neighborhoods and led to one of the most intensive local investigations of the time. When April Tinsley did not arrive home for dinner, her mother immediately reported her missing to the police, sparking a large-scale search effort. Over 250 Fort Wayne officers, along with 50 volunteers, scoured the area for any sign of the young girl. During the investigation, a witness came forward, reporting that they had seen a white man in his 30s forcing a girl, believed to be April, into a blue pickup truck. 3 days later, on April 4th, 1988, a jogger discovered April's body in a ditch just west of Spencerville, Indiana. Near the scene, investigators recovered one of her shoes and a shopping bag containing a personal item, while a separate motorist reported seeing a blue pickup truck in the vicinity. The autopsy confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled, and determined that she had likely been deceased for 1 to 2 days, with her body placed in the ditch only a few hours before it was found. In response to the tragedy, local radio stations quickly established a reward fund to aid in the investigation, and additional funds were set up to support her family and cover burial expenses. April's memorial service was held a few days later at Faith United Methodist Church, followed by her burial at Greenlawn Memorial Park, as the community mourned the loss of the young girl. The initial police investigation quickly focused on a 34-year-old man who was facing separate child molestation charges but was acquitted of those allegations the following month. In response to April's disappearance and the broader concern for missing children, 90 members of the Fort Wayne community came together on April 20th, 1988, to form the volunteer group April, Associated Parents Regional Independent League, later known as Abduction Prevention Reconnaissance and Information League, dedicated to assisting authorities in locating missing children and supporting investigations. Years later, the Tinsley family continued to seek justice for April, holding a press conference at the Allen County Courthouse on June 24, 2005, to appeal for any new leads. In 2009, Indiana authorities enlisted the help of the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment (CARD) task force to assist in solving the case, bringing federal resources to the ongoing investigation. On May 21, 1990, authorities discovered a disturbing message written on a barn in St. Joseph Township, which read, "I kill 8-year-old April Marie Tinsley, and did you find the other shoe? Haha, I will kill again," written with crayons found nearby. Investigators initially considered that the threat might be connected to the murder of 7-year-old Sarah Jean Boker, whose body had been discovered in Fort Wayne on June 14, 1990. In response, local and state police established a dedicated homicide team in April 1991 to examine both the Tinsley and Boker cases. Several months later, on August 7, 1991, the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit analyzed the cases and concluded that, while the murders bore some similarities, the incidents were ultimately unrelated. During Memorial Day weekend in 2004, authorities discovered 4 threatening notes in the Fort Wayne area, believed to have been written by April Tinsley's murderer. 3 of the notes were left on girls' bicycles, and 1 was placed in a mailbox. 3 of the notes had been placed inside plastic bags along with used condoms and Polaroid photos of a man's lower body. One of the messages warned, "Hi, honey, I've been watching you. I'm the same person that kidnapped and harmed April Tinsley. You are my next victim. If you don't report this to police, and if I don't see this in the paper tomorrow or on the local news, I will blow up your house." DNA recovered from the condoms matched the police's existing profile of the suspect, confirming that the incidents were connected and providing critical evidence for investigators. April Tinsley's case received renewed national attention over the years through several investigative programs. In April 2009, America's Most Wanted aired a segment on her disappearance and appealed to the public for tips. Later, the series Crime Watch Daily featured the case in an episode that aired in 2016. On July 15, 2018, the murder was covered in an episode of On the Case with Paula Zahn, which aired just hours after an arrest was made in connection with the case. Recognizing the dedication and skill of local law enforcement, the Indiana State Police honored 3 Fort Wayne investigators on October soon after April Tinsley's murder. Police released a composite sketch of the suspect based on the account of a witness who reported seeing her kidnapper. On April 26, 1988, DNA samples from Tinsley and 5 potential suspects were sent to a private lab in Germantown, Maryland, but the results were inconclusive. Years later, in 2009, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit created a profile of the suspect, identifying him as a preferential child sex offender, meaning he had a persistent sexual attraction to children. The profile described him as a white male in his 40s or 50s, living or working in Northeast Fort Wayne or Allen County, with a low to medium income. In June 2015, The Virginia-based company Parabon used DNA evidence to produce a snapshot composite sketch of the suspect, which was later updated and publicly released by police in early May 2016. Or 26, 2018, for their crucial role in identifying John D. Miller as a suspect in Tinsley's murder. In May 2018, a Fort Wayne Police Department detective sent a DNA sample from the Tinsley case to the forensics company Parabon Nanolabs, which used the genealogy database GeneMatch to identify relatives of the suspect. By July 2, 2018, genealogist C.C. Moore had narrowed the list of potential suspects to 2 brothers, including 59-year-old John D. Miller of Grable, Indiana, whose neighbors described him as reclusive and often angry. Investigators recovered used condoms from Miller's trash and obtained a DNA sample that matched the evidence from the crime. On July 15, 2018, detectives visited Miller's home and asked him to come to the police station. After being read his rights, he was asked if he knew why they wanted to speak with him, to which he reportedly responded, April Tinsley. During the station interview, Miller confessed to the abduction and murder, admitting that he had taken Tinsley from the neighborhood and caused her death in his trailer. John D. Miller was formally charged with murder, child molestation, and confinement, and initially pleaded not guilty at a court hearing on July 19, 2018. On December 7, 2018, he changed his plea to guilty, admitting that he had raped Tinsley and strangled her with his hands. He was sentenced to 80 years in prison, 50 years for murder and 30 years for child molestation. Following his sentencing, Miller was first held at the Indiana Department of Correction Reception Diagnostic Center in Plainfield and was later transferred to the New Castle Correctional Facility on January 16, 2019. His earliest possible release date was scheduled for July 15, 2058, when he would have been 99 years old. Miller died of natural causes at St. Vincent Indianapolis Hospital on September 4, 2025. In April 2015, construction began in Fort Wayne's Hoagland, Masterson neighborhood, on a memorial dedicated to April Tinsley, known as April's Garden, created to honor her memory and raise awareness about child safety. On July 28, 2018, a memorial walk starting at April's Garden was held, allowing the community to pay tribute to her life. On April 4, 2018, April's mother held a balloon launch at April's Garden to remember her daughter and other child victims of violence. The following day, Fairfield Elementary School formally dedicated a pink magnolia tree and a bench in April's memory, followed by a candlelight vigil attended by students, families, and community members. In recognition of the decades-long investigation that led to the arrest and conviction of April's murderer, 9 investigators were awarded the National Association of Police Organizations, NAPO, National Policing Award in May 2019. The honorees from the Indiana State Police, the FBI, the Allen County Sheriff's Department, and the Fort Wayne Police Department were celebrated for their tireless collaboration over 30 years, and NAPO recognized them as among the most dedicated and exemplary law enforcement officers in the country. Case 7 Lori Dan, born Lori Wasserman on October 18, 1957, grew up in Glencoe, Illinois, a northern suburb of Chicago. She was the daughter of Edith Joy and Norman Wasserman, an accountant, and had one older brother. Raised in a Jewish household, Lori spent her early years in a close-knit family environment, shaped by her upbringing in the suburban Chicago community. Lori Dan was often described as shy and struggled with social interactions. During childhood, she displayed signs of obsessive-compulsive disorder, which appeared to lessen as she entered adolescence. In high school, Lori experienced a few brief romantic relationships. During a family vacation to Hawaii over the 1973 holiday season, she met Barry Gallup, a year older and also from the Chicago area. The two continued seeing each other after returning to Illinois, but their relationship ended the following spring when Barry graduated high school and went to college. In 1974, the Wassermans moved to a new neighborhood, and Lori attended a different high school for her senior year. That summer, while visiting Aspen, Colorado, she met Wade Keats, another young man from the Chicago area, and they briefly dated for 2 months. Lori had several other short-term relationships during her final year of high school and also underwent plastic surgery to reduce the size of her nose. She graduated from Winnetka's New Trier High School in 1975 and, despite poor grades, was able to enroll at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. After improving her academic record, she transferred to the University of Arizona, where she expressed an interest in becoming a teacher, although she reportedly admitted to acquaintances that her true goal was to find a husband. During this period, she dated a pre-med student, Steve Witt, who prioritized his education over their relationship. When he secured a medical residency in Arizona, he ended the relationship, leaving Lori disappointed. In the summer of 1977, she attended the University of Wisconsin in Madison, taking courses in home economics as she continued her exploration of academic and personal interests. After the end of her relationship in 1980, Lori Dan moved back into her parents' home. She attempted to continue her education by transferring to Northwestern University, but she withdrew from all her classes and never completed her degree, marking a period of stagnation in her early adulthood. After leaving school, Lori began working as a cocktail waitress at Green Acres, an exclusive Jewish country club, where she met Russell Dan, a 25-year-old insurance salesman working in his family's firm. During their courtship, Lori presented an embellished version of her life, claiming she was a graduate student at Northwestern University pursuing a career in hospital administration, that she had previously worked for Dan Brothers Insurance, and that she held an accounting degree from the University of Arizona. The couple dated for 9 months before marrying at Green Acres on September 11th, 1982, and honeymooned in the British Virgin Islands. However, their marriage quickly began to deteriorate. Russell and his family observed signs of obsessive-compulsive disorder and unusual behavior, such as leaving trash scattered around the house. Lori experienced multiple job losses, often framing them as being unfairly terminated or forced to quit. Her in-laws developed a negative impression of her, viewing her as childish and antisocial. On one occasion, she even served a dish of rotting potatoes at a family gathering. Lori sought psychiatric help briefly, during which a doctor linked her difficulties to her childhood and upbringing, but she abandoned therapy after 3 months. Although Russell encouraged her to return, she did not engage seriously in treatment, and the underlying behavioral issues persisted. In September 1985, shortly after their 3rd anniversary, Russell attended one of Lori Dan's therapy sessions and discovered that she had never fully shared her problems with her therapist. Despite mounting pressure from his family to end the marriage, Russell continued to hope things could improve. He bought Lori a pink sweatsuit and a bouquet of flowers, but she clung to both objects obsessively. The flowers withered and died while she continued to carry them, and she refused to remove the sweatsuit for fear that Russell would abandon her. By October, Russell decided to end the relationship, prompting Lori to move back in with her parents, where her mental health further deteriorated. The divorce negotiations quickly became bitter and contentious. Lori accused Russell of abuse and warned him that if she could not have him, nobody else could. Over the following months, the police were called multiple times to investigate various incidents involving Lori, including harassing phone calls made to Russell and his family. In April 1986, she accused Russell of breaking into and vandalizing her parents' home, where she was living at the time. On May 5th, she legally purchased a Smith & Wesson Model 19.357 Magnum, claiming she needed it for self-defense. Since she had no criminal record, she was able to complete the purchase, despite concerns from law enforcement who unsuccessfully tried to convince her and her family to surrender the firearm. During June, divorce negotiations continued, with Lori's father demanding a $100,000 lump settlement and $20,000 monthly alimony payments over 10 years. Although Russell was financially well off, Lori had no immediate need for such support. His attorneys requested her college records, only to discover that she had never graduated and had never worked as a research assistant, undermining her claims of financial dependence. In August 1986, Lori Dan contacted her former boyfriend Steve Witt, who by that time was married and working as a resident at a hospital in New York. She claimed that she had his child, but Steve, having not seen her in 5 years, dismissed the allegation as false. Undeterred, Lori called the hospital where he worked, alleging that he had raped her in the emergency room, claims that were entirely unsubstantiated. The following month, Russell Dan accused Lori of stabbing him in his sleep with an ice pick, narrowly missing his heart. Despite the severity of the injury, police chose not to press charges after a medical report suggested the wound might have been self-inflicted, compounded by Russell's abrasive demeanor toward investigators and a failed polygraph test. Harassing phone calls to Russell and his family continued, leading to Lori's arrest for calls made to Russell's sister, though charges were ultimately dropped for lack of evidence. By February 1987, Lori and Russell reached an agreement to split profits from selling their house, covering $10,000 in legal fees and arranging $1,250 monthly payments for 3 years. Just before their divorce was finalized in April, Lori accused Russell of raping her, but no physical evidence supported her claims, though she passed 2 polygraph tests. In May, she alleged that Russell had placed an incendiary device in her home, presenting police with an unexploded Molotov cocktail and a candle supposedly intended to ignite it, claiming a window screen had been cut. Investigators found no evidence tying Russell to the incident, and no charges were filed. Throughout this period, Lori's parents supported her claims and kept her close. She was being treated by a psychiatrist for obsessive-compulsive disorder and a chemical imbalance, who informed authorities that Lori did not appear suicidal or homicidal, leaving her mental state officially concerning but not considered immediately dangerous. During this period, Lori Dan began working as a babysitter, advertising her services throughout the neighborhood. While some clients spoke positively of her, others filed complaints with police regarding damaged furniture and the theft of food and clothing. No charges were ever filed. In at least one case, her father covered the cost of the damages. In the summer of 1987, Lori sublet a university apartment in Evanston, Illinois, where her unusual behavior became more pronounced. She spent hours riding elevators up and down, wore rubber gloves to avoid touching metal, and left meat to rot in sofa cushions. She did not enroll in any classes at the university. That autumn, she claimed to have received threatening letters from her ex-husband Russell and alleged he had sexually assaulted her in a parking lot, but police dismissed these claims. During the same period, she purchased a .32 caliber Smith & Wesson Model 30-1 revolver. As her mental health deteriorated, Lori and her family sought specialized treatment. In January 1988, she moved to a student residence in Wisconsin to be monitored by a psychiatrist who specialized in obsessive-compulsive disorder. She had already been prescribed clomipramine, a medication for OCD, and her new psychiatrist increased the dosage, added lithium carbonate to manage mood swings, and initiated behavioral therapy to address her phobias and ritualistic behaviors. Despite these interventions, Lori's compulsive and erratic behaviors continued, including extended periods in elevators, repetitive channel surfing on television, and an obsession with good and bad numbers. Her eccentric conduct earned her the nickname the Psycho Elevator Lady on campus, and there were also growing concerns that she may have been struggling with bulimia. At the end of December 1987, Lori Dan purchased a .22 caliber Beretta 21A Bobcat. By March 1988, she had stopped attending her appointments with both her psychiatrist and behavior therapist. During this time, she began actively preparing for violent attacks. She stole library books on poisons, collected and diluted arsenic and other chemicals from a laboratory, and shoplifted clothes and wigs to use as disguises. She was arrested once for theft, and despite attempts by both her psychiatrist and her father to have her admitted as an inpatient for treatment, she refused. Lori's harassment and threats escalated during this period. She made repeated hang-up calls to her former in-laws and babysitting clients, which eventually included explicit death threats. Some of the targets were random and had no connection to her. On one occasion, she called the family of a boy who had won a spelling bee, warning them that she intended to kill their son. In May 1988, she sent a letter to the hospital where her ex-boyfriend Steve Witt worked, falsely accusing him of sexual assault. Assistant U.S. Attorney Janet Johnson considered pressing charges for threatening interstate phone calls, later describing the taped messages as frightening even after years in the legal profession. Police attempted to persuade her father, Norman Wasserman, to surrender Lori's firearms, but he refused. Fearing that Lori could act on her threats if released on bail, Steve Witt opted to wait until other charges were filed in Illinois. That same month, a janitor discovered Lori lying in a fetal position inside a garbage bag in a trash room, prompting a search of her apartment. Shortly thereafter, she returned to her parents' home in Glencoe. FBI agents arrived to question her about the threatening calls to Arizona, but she had already left. Because the case was considered low priority at the time, investigators did not pursue it further, leaving her escalating behavior largely unchecked. In the days leading up to May 20th, 1988, Lori Dan meticulously prepared poisoned rice cereal snacks and juice boxes using the diluted arsenic she had stolen in Wisconsin. She mailed these items to a former acquaintance, ex-babysitting clients, her psychiatrist, her ex-husband, and other individuals she held grudges against. In the early hours of May 20th, she personally delivered some of the poisoned treats to selected recipients. She also distributed snacks to several fraternity houses, Alpha Tau Omega, Psi Upsilon, and Kappa Sigma, as well as to Leveron Hall at Northwestern University. Some of the deliveries included handwritten notes. The drinks and cereal squares often leaked or were unpleasant to taste, and because the arsenic had been highly diluted, none of the recipients became seriously ill. At approximately 9 a.m., Lori arrived at the home of the Rush family, former babysitting clients in Winnetka, to pick up their two youngest children. The previous day, she had offered to babysit the boys, but the parents had declined, mentioning that they were planning a move to New York. Lori convinced them to allow her to take the children to a fair. Instead of going to the fair, she drove them to Ravinia Elementary School in Highland Park, mistakenly believing that both of her ex-sister-in-law's sons attended there. In reality, one of the intended targets was not even a student at the school. She left the children in the car while she entered the building and attempted to detonate an incendiary device in one of the hallways. The small fire was quickly discovered and extinguished by a teacher. Lori then drove to a nearby Jewish daycare center, where her ex-sister-in-law's daughter attended, and attempted to enter the building carrying a plastic container filled with gasoline, but staff prevented her from entering. Afterwards, she returned the children to the Rush home and offered them arsenic-laced milk, which they spat out due to its strange taste. Once inside, Lori lured the boys downstairs and used gasoline to ignite a fire in the house, trapping the children and their mother in the basement. Despite the danger, the family managed to escape the blaze unharmed. Lori Dan then drove approximately 3.5 blocks to Hubbard Woods Elementary School, carrying 3 handguns. It is believed that she intended to target the Rush children's 2 older siblings, though they were away on a field trip that day. Once inside the school, she wandered into a second-grade classroom briefly before leaving. As she moved through a hallway, she encountered 6-year-old Robert Trossman and shoved him into the boys' restroom, firing her Beretta pistol into his chest. When she attempted to shoot at 2 other boys, her Smith & Wesson revolver jammed, prompting her to discard the weapon along with its spare ammunition into a trash receptacle. The boys managed to flee the restroom and alerted school staff. Dan returned to the second-grade classroom, where students were working in groups on a bicycle safety test. She forced all the children into the corner of the room. In an attempt to stop her, the teacher struggled with Dan and managed to unload the Beretta. Lori then drew her second Smith & Wesson revolver from the waistband of her shorts and aimed it at several groups of students. She shot 5 children, fatally wounding Nick Corwin with a single shot to the heart and injuring 4 others: Mark Tiberek, Peter Monroe, Lindsay Fisher, and Catherine Miller. After the shooting, she fled the school in her car. Spotting a police cruiser nearby, she reversed her direction and drove away from the scene. Lori Dan was unable to escape the area by car because local roads had been temporarily closed for a funeral procession. Attempting to get around the blockage, she drove her vehicle in reverse down a nearby street, but misjudged a turn and crashed into a tree. Abandoning the wrecked car, she removed her blood-stained shorts and tied a blue garbage bag around her waist, concealing herself. Armed with her 2 remaining handguns, she made her way on foot through the nearby woods. During her flight, Dan came across the home of the Andrew family. She entered the house and encountered Mrs. Andrew and her 20-year-old son, Philip, in the kitchen. Dan claimed that she had been attacked and raped by a man in her car, asserting that she had shot the assailant in self-defense. Unbeknownst to the Andrews, the police were actively searching for Dan herself, unaware that she was fabricating a story to mislead them. Taking Dan's story at face value, the Andrews family tried to reassure her, telling her that she need not fear the police if she had acted in self-defense. Mrs. Andrew gave Lori a pair of her daughter's pants to wear. While Lori was changing, Philip Andrew managed to discreetly pick up her Beretta and pocket it. Acting on a suggestion, Lori called her mother, confessing that she had done something terrible and that the police were involved. Philip then took the phone and relayed Lori's fabricated story about being raped and shooting her assailant, suggesting that her mother come pick her up. Lori's mother replied that she could not leave because she did not have a car. When Mr. Andrew arrived home, the family pressed Lori to surrender her second handgun. Lori called her mother again, and Mr. Andrew spoke to her, asking her to persuade Lori to give up the weapon. Her mother appeared largely disinterested, only expressing a hope that her daughter would get home safely before ending the call. During this time, Mrs. Andrew left the house and contacted the police. Mr. Andrew warned Lori that he would not stay in the home if she refused to put down the gun and leave. Lori ordered Philip to remain in the room. Just before noon, seeing police approaching the house, Lori shot Philip in the chest. Miraculously, Philip was able to escape out the back door and was later rescued by first responders. With the house surrounded by law enforcement, Lori retreated upstairs to a bedroom. Her parents and ex-husband were brought to the scene in an effort to reason with her. At around 7 p.m., a tactical assault team entered the house while Lori's father attempted to communicate with her using a bullhorn. Inside the bedroom, police discovered Lori Dan's body. She had taken her own life by shooting herself in the mouth. The murder of Nick Corwin inside an elementary school became one of the first school shootings to dominate the 24-hour news cycle, with media coverage largely focusing on Lori Dan's mental state. At the time, no other school shooting had received such extensive attention, leading many to refer to Corwin's murder as the first school shooting. The tragedy also marked what some described as an end of innocence for the affluent North Shore community of Chicago, which had not experienced a murder in 3 decades. Of the other children wounded by Dan, all but one ultimately recovered from their injuries, including a young girl who had suffered severe internal trauma from a gunshot. Families and victims received extensive psychological support in the aftermath, helping them cope with the lasting emotional and mental effects of the attack. The incident left an enduring impact on the community and became a reference point in discussions of school safety, mental health, and the emerging phenomenon of school shootings. In the years following the attack, parents and community members dedicated themselves to advocating for stricter gun control policies. Philip Andrew, who had been shot by Lori Dan, gave interviews about gun control from his hospital bed. He later became deeply involved in local and state gun control efforts, serving as the executive director of the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence, and eventually pursued careers as a lawyer and an FBI agent. Dr. Donald Monroe, superintendent of Winnetka School District 36, reflected on the tragedy by noting that his previously considered safe school was not as isolated and insulated as we thought. At the time, Hubbard Woods Elementary, like many schools, was an open campus with numerous doors to classrooms left unlocked. In the aftermath, schools began adopting single-point entry systems to improve security and limit unauthorized access. The shooting also reignited debates over involuntary commitment for mentally ill individuals. Advocates argued that those who were deemed incapable of making informed decisions about their treatment should be committed for public safety. Meanwhile, civil libertarians cautioned against broad restrictions, warning that the rights of millions of mentally ill individuals should not be curtailed due to rare, extreme incidents. The tragedy inspired a book, Murder of Innocence by Eric Zorn, which was later adapted into a made-for-television film. In the adaptation, Lori Dan's character was renamed Lori Wade and portrayed by Valerie Bertinelli, who received guidance and coaching from Russell Dan to accurately capture the events and psychology behind the attack. After the shooting, Lori Dan's parents faced intense scrutiny and blame for allegedly shielding her despite clear signs of deteriorating mental health. Investigators struggled because the Wassermans refused interviews and initially denied access to Lori's psychiatric records, which were later obtained only through court order. On the night of the attack, they permitted only a brief search of her bedroom before cleaning the space and removing potential evidence. Norm Wasserman also demanded the return of Lori's wrecked Toyota, which was registered in his name. Police were similarly criticized for failing to properly secure the bedroom as a crime scene. Subsequently, parents of the victims filed lawsuits against the Wassermans for damages. Criticism extended to Lori Dan's psychiatrists, who were faulted for not recognizing or acting upon the signs of her worsening mental stability. At the time of her death, she had been prescribed clomipramine, a medication not yet approved by the FDA. While some initially suspected the drug might have contributed to her mental decline, it was eventually ruled out as a direct factor. Among Dan's possessions, investigators found 2 newspaper clippings, one detailing a man who had randomly killed 2 people in a public place, and another describing a young man who attempted suicide but survived, with his brain injury reportedly curing his OCD. Analysts suggested these articles may have influenced her thinking. Psychologists and law enforcement theorized that Dan's attacks targeted individuals who had disappointed her: her ex-husband, her former sister-in-law through firebombing attempts, her ex-boyfriend and his wife, families of children she had babysat, and former friends. She appeared to select victims based on personal grievances rather than randomness. Dan was briefly considered as a potential suspect in the Chicago Tylenol murders, but no evidence linked her to the case. Case 8 on the evening of Sunday, October 22, 1989, just after 9 p.m., 11-year-old Jacob Wetterling, his 10-year-old brother Trevor, and their friend Aaron Larson, aged 11, were riding their bikes home from a convenience store in St. Joseph, Minnesota, where they had rented a video. Suddenly, Danny Heinrich, wearing a stocking cap mask and carrying an unloaded revolver, emerged from a driveway and ordered the boys to throw their bikes into a ditch and lie face down. He questioned each boy about their ages and then told Trevor to run toward a nearby wooded area without looking back, threatening to shoot him if he did. Heinrich then examined the 2 remaining boys and chose Jacob, instructing Aaron to flee under the same threat. This encounter marked the last time Jacob was seen alive. In the wake of his disappearance, local authorities, the FBI, and the National Guard launched an extensive search that included thousands of tips and the establishment of the Friends of Jacob Wetterling Center. But despite the overwhelming community response, the case remained unsolved for nearly 30 years. Heinrich was questioned early in the investigation, but law enforcement lacked sufficient evidence to charge him at the time. On January 13, 1989, roughly 9 months before the Wetterling abduction, 12-year-old Jared Skierl was kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and physically threatened by an unknown adult man in Cold Spring, Minnesota. The victim's statement given on that night showed the modus operandi was similar to that of the Wetterling case. The perpetrator, who was later identified as Heinrich, used a gun and, upon releasing the boy, told him to run and not look back or else he would be shot. That incident occurred 10 miles, 16 kilometers, from where he would later stop the Wetterling brothers and their friend. In May 2014, investigators announced they were re-examining a series of attempted and completed child molestations that had taken place in the Paynesville area during the 2 years before Jacob Wetterling's abduction. Between the summer of 1986 and spring of 1987, 5 teenage boys had been attacked, though no arrests were made at the time. Authorities re-interviewed some of the victims and collaborated with an amateur investigator, Joy Baker, who had originally brought the cases to light. After months of reviewing the evidence and speaking with victims, Investigators concluded that the attacks were likely connected and suspected the same offender might be responsible for Wetterling's abduction, which occurred just 40 minutes from the earlier incidents. In October 2015, Danny James Heinrich was publicly identified as a person of interest in the disappearance of Jacob Wetterling. Heinrich had previously been questioned by the FBI on December 16, 1989, and a DNA sample had been collected, but at that time he was not charged and was released. In 2015, investigators matched Heinrich's DNA to evidence from the January 1989 abduction of 12-year-old Jared Skierl in nearby Cold Spring, Minnesota. Since the statute of limitations for that case had expired, Heinrich could not be charged for Skierl's kidnapping. A search warrant was executed at Heinrich's home, where authorities discovered child sexual abuse material, resulting in his arrest on October 28, 2015. As part of a plea deal, Danny Heinrich cooperated with authorities and, on September 1, 2016, led investigators to a burial site. There, Jacob Wetterling's clothing and human remains were recovered from a pasture near Paynesville, roughly 30 miles from his home and the location of his abduction, and not far from where Heinrich had lived in 1989. On September 3rd, dental records confirmed the remains were Jacob's. His mother, Patty Wetterling, told local NBC affiliate KARE 11, "All I can confirm is that Jacob has been found and our hearts are broken. I'm not responding to any media yet, as I have no words." As part of his plea agreement, Heinrich admitted guilt to one of the 25 federal child pornography charges against him. In exchange, he revealed the location of Jacob Wetterling's body and agreed to testify about the details of the crime. At a hearing before Judge John Tunheim in the United States District Court for the District of Minnesota, Heinrich testified that he had kidnapped and handcuffed Jacob, driven him to a gravel pit near Paynesville, molested him, killed him, and buried his body. He explained that he had evaded police that night by monitoring a police scanner. A year later, Heinrich returned to the site and moved the body after noticing Wetterling's jacket had become exposed. During the same hearing, Heinrich also confessed to kidnapping and sexually assaulting Jared Skierl earlier that year. In exchange for Heinrich's plea, prosecutors agreed not to charge him with Jacob Wetterling's murder. Under the plea agreement, Heinrich received the maximum 20-year prison term for the child pornography conviction. The deal also allows state authorities to seek his civil commitment as a sexual predator at the end of his federal sentence, which could effectively keep him in custody for life. In sentencing, Judge John Tunheim said, "We won't pretend that this crime and sentence is about child pornography. It is also about changing the lives of so many children and parents who prayed for Jacob's return and also feared you coming out of the dark. Every child knows the story of Jacob Wetterling. You stole the innocence of children in small towns, in the cities of Minnesota and beyond." Although Heinrich could theoretically be released in 17 years, Judge Tunheim emphasized it was unlikely, stating, "This crime is so heinous, so brutal and awful that it is unlikely society will ever let you go free." In January 2017, Heinrich was transferred to the Federal Medical Center, Devens, in Massachusetts to serve his sentence. 4 months after Jacob Wetterling's abduction, his parents, Jerry and Patty Wetterling, established the Jacob Wetterling Foundation, an advocacy group focused on children's safety. In 1994, the Federal Jacob Wetterling Act was passed and named in Jacob's honor. It was the first law to create a state sex offender registry. The law has been updated several times, including notable amendments through Megan's Law in 1996 and the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act in 2006. In 2008, the foundation evolved into the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center, continuing the family's mission to educate the public about who takes children, how they do it, and what each of us can do to stop it. Additionally, the Bridge of Hope, a crossing of the Mississippi River near St. Cloud, was named in Jacob's memory. After Heinrich's arrest, media reports revealed that both he and his brother had been sexually abused as children by Dwayne Hart, a man who was dating their mother and was later convicted as a sex offender. Hart has been described as someone who would come along if you were a single woman with kids, pretend he likes you, and that would be it. According to reports, Hart had actually implicated Heinrich as early as 1991 in connection with the Wetterling case, telling investigators that Heinrich had asked him how to dispose of a body and that he had noticed suspicious objects at Heinrich's home. At the time, however, this information was apparently not pursued by authorities. Case 9 in the summer of 2000, 16-year-old Molly Ann Bish, born August 2nd, 1983, worked as a lifeguard at Comins Pond in Warren, Massachusetts. On June 26th, the day before her disappearance, her mother, Magi, noticed a mustached man in a white car parked near the beach where Molly worked. Although the man seemed suspicious, Magi did not feel her daughter was in immediate danger. The next day, June 27th, Magi dropped Molly off at Comins Pond and left her by the lifeguard station. Magi did not see the suspicious man again, but witnesses later reported seeing someone resembling him in the parking lot just minutes before Molly arrived. A local worker also reported a similar car parked at a nearby cemetery connected to the pond by a path. Magi was the last known person to see Molly alive. Hours later, police contacted her parents to report that no lifeguard had been on duty that day and that Molly's belongings had been left at the station. An extensive search for her began immediately. In the fall of 2002, a hunter spotted a blue swimsuit in the woods on Whiskey Hill in Palmer, prompting a thorough search of the area. Nearly a year later, on June 9, 2003, Molly Bish's remains were found about 5 miles, 8 kilometers, from her family home. Due to the condition of the body, the exact cause of death could not be determined, but investigators believe that she was murdered. In 2005, a Connecticut man facing attempted kidnapping charges in New York was briefly investigated in connection with Molly Bish's disappearance. In 2009, attention shifted to a new suspect, Rodney Stanger, who had lived in Southbridge, Massachusetts, near Warren, for over 20 years before moving to Florida a year after Bish's murder. Authorities were alerted to Stanger following the murder of his longtime girlfriend, Crystal Morrison, when her sister contacted Massachusetts police. Stanger had access to a white car matching the one seen the day before Bish disappeared, and he was known to fish in Comins Pond and hunt in the woods where her body was eventually found. He also closely fit the description given by Magi Bish of the man seen in the white sedan. During the 2009 investigation, police questioned Stanger about the 1993 disappearance of Holly Pyranen in nearby Sturbridge. Bish and Pyranen had been the same age, and in 1993, Bish had even written a letter of hope to Pyranen's parents. Stanger was never charged in either case. Later, in 2012, forensic evidence led authorities to identify David Pouliot, who had died in 2003, as a person of interest in the Pyranen case. In November 2011, Gerald Battistoni was named as a suspect in the disappearance and murder of Molly Bish. Battistoni had served time in prison for repeatedly raping a teenage girl in the early 1990s and had a criminal record dating back to 1980. He had been in the area where Bish's body was found and closely resembled a composite sketch of the man Magi Bish had seen in the parking lot. After newspaper articles linked him to both Bish's and Holly Pyranen's deaths, Battistoni attempted suicide while in prison. The Bish family, working with a private investigator, requested DNA testing, and the Massachusetts State Police sent the evidence to Texas for analysis. Battistoni died in November 2014. On June 3, 2021, Worcester County District Attorney Joseph Early announced that Francis Sumner had become a new person of interest in the case. Sumner, a registered sex offender with a long criminal history, had been found dead in his home in Spencer, Massachusetts, on May 4, 2016. Early did not reveal the exact connection between Sumner and the Bish case, only noting that investigators had received new information. Sumner had previously been convicted in 1982 of aggravated rape and kidnapping, receiving a minimum 9-year prison sentence. To date, no arrests have been made in Molly Bish's case. Her disappearance prompted the most extensive and costly search in Massachusetts history and has been featured on numerous American television programs, including Disappeared, America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, and 48 Hours. In 2023, as the 23rd anniversary of her disappearance approached, District Attorney Joseph Early provided an update. Despite the lack of arrests, Francis Sumner, though deceased, remains a person of interest. Early expressed confidence in the ongoing efforts of state police detectives and highlighted the continued testing of evidence using advances in forensic science. He also emphasized the growing role of familial DNA in investigations and supported legislative changes to make its use easier. The Bish family continues to advocate for child abduction awareness and for a resolution to the case, while an anonymous tip line remains open for anyone with information. In 2004, Molly's parents, Magi and John Bish, established the Molly Bish Foundation to continue her legacy and raise awareness about child safety. Kasten Zara Baker was born on November 16, 1999, to Emily Dietrich and Adam Baker in Wagga Wagga, New South Wales. After Zara's birth, her mother experienced postpartum depression and, when Zara was 8 months old, separated from Adam, giving him full custody. In 2004, Adam moved with Zara and his parents to Drew, Queensland, for work at a sugar mill. Zara, diagnosed with bone cancer in 2005 and later with lung cancer, had the lower part of one leg amputated and required hearing aids. During this time, Adam reportedly met Elisa Fairchild, originally from Western North Carolina, through an online IMVU chat site. Fairchild visited Adam in Queensland, and the two were soon married. She had previously been married 6 times and was still legally married at the time of their union. Zara's cancer went into remission in 2008, shortly before she moved with her father and stepmother to the United States. After moving to North Carolina, the Bakers settled in Hickory, where Zara attended public school for a time before being withdrawn to begin homeschooling. Whether she was ever actually homeschooled is unclear, but it is suspected she was removed due to reports of abuse implicating her stepmother, Elisa Baker. Neighbors frequently claimed that Elisa was physically and mentally abusive and neglected Zara. In one instance, 2 teachers visited Zara's home after she arrived at a Hudson public school in 4th grade with a black eye. Child Protective Services from both Caldwell and Catawba counties reportedly visited the family's various residences multiple times before Zara's murder. The family had moved several times within those counties before finally settling in Hickory. Investigations into Elisa's abusive behavior extended back to 1999 and included concerns about her own biological children, a daughter from a previous boyfriend, and a son and daughter from a prior marriage. On October 9, 2010, at 5:30 a.m., Elisa Baker called 911 to report a fire in the backyard of the family home in Hickory. When police arrived, they discovered a ransom note and detected the smell of gasoline coming from Adam Baker's company vehicle, a Chevrolet Tahoe. Later that same day, at 2 p.m., Adam Baker placed a second 911 call to report Zara missing. He explained that during the backyard fire, a $1 million ransom note had been found on his company truck, addressed to his boss and landlord, Mark Coffey. Adam suggested that whoever started the fire may have done so as a distraction to take Zara, claiming that the kidnapper had mistaken her for Coffey's daughter, who was actually safe with her family. Adam stated that the last time he saw Zara was at 2:30 a.m., noting that he had left for work early that morning and did not return until after she had gone to sleep. Early in the investigation, Elisa Baker failed a polygraph test. Investigators questioned her about whether she had harmed Zara, whether she knew anyone who had, and whether she knew who had written the ransom note. On October 10, 2010, search and rescue dogs were brought in to examine the Baker's house of vehicles. The dogs gave positive alerts for the scent of human remains in both the Chevrolet Tahoe and a sedan. Police collected swabs from what they suspected might be blood. Elisa was initially arrested on unrelated charges, including communicating threats, writing bad checks, larceny, and driving with a revoked license. While in jail, she was then charged with obstruction of justice after admitting that she had written the ransom note to mislead the police. In late October 2010, a Catawba County judge increased Elisa Baker's bond from $40,000 to $65,000, citing concerns that she was a flight risk. At the hearing, her daughter, Amber Fairchild, testified that Elisa had considered leaving North Carolina the day before her arrest. Amber also revealed that her mother was involved in an online relationship with a man from England who had sent her thousands of dollars. The prosecutor added that, in contrast to her lawyer's efforts to reduce the bond, Elisa had previously failed to appear in court for other charges, including traffic violations and communicating threats. Elisa Baker's aunt, Bonzetta Winkler, told reporters that Elisa had claimed Zara had been sick for 2 weeks before her death, and that she and Adam dismembered the child and hid her remains. Winkler said she'd been sick 2 weeks before she died. When they found her, I guess they didn't know what to do. They just went wild. Elisa reportedly told authorities that Adam had dismembered Zara alone after her death, and that both of them concealed her remains. She also stated that Zara died on September 24th, but was not reported missing until October 9th. While in jail, Elisa allegedly corresponded with crime memorabilia dealer Eric Gain, using an assumed name. She wrote to him twice, admitting in one letter, "We really didn't kill her, but what he did after the fact is kind of horrifying. It makes me scared of him." Elisa also reportedly told her attorney, Lisa Dubs, that Zara's prosthetic leg had been discarded in a dumpster at the Fox Ridge Apartments in Hickory. Dubs alerted police, who later recovered the prosthetic in late October off a road in Caldwell County, a few miles from one of Elisa's former residences. Using medical records obtained from Australia, Hickory police were able to match the serial number and confirm that the leg belonged to Zara. In November 2010, Elisa Baker began leading police to various locations in Catawba and Caldwell counties to locate Zara's scattered remains. Investigators recovered numerous bones, though Zara's head was not found until several years later. Elisa allegedly told police that she had thrown Zara's mattress into a dumpster, which was later confirmed when a mattress matching the description was discovered in a landfill. She also guided authorities to another dumpster behind a grocery store in Hudson, where she and Adam had discarded a car cover and bed cover used to transport and conceal Zara's body. Elisa further informed police that additional body parts could be found in the bathtub drain trap, and that the plastic glove she had used would be located in her bathroom. A review of Elisa Baker's now-defunct MySpace page showed that she used the username Gothic Fairy 6668. Her page featured Skulls and Bones While Living Dead Girl by Rob Zombie played in the background. She listed Neverland as her hometown, Queensland, Australia as her state and country, claimed to be a college graduate, and described herself as a proud parent. The page also included photos of Zara, including one in which Zara was dressed in all black with the caption, "The Dark Child." LOL. On her last day signing in, October 8th, 2010, one day before Zara was reported missing, Elisa listed her mood as crazy. Elisa Baker reportedly married 7 times, at times overlapping marriages without divorces. Before marrying Adam Baker, she had been married to 3 men within 3 years. In January 2011, she was charged with bigamy after it was confirmed she was still legally married to Aaron Young when she wed Adam. She had even introduced Young to Adam as her brother. Elisa maintained frequent contact with Aaron Young, and both had visited the IMBU.com website on September 22, 2010, just 2 days before she later claimed Zara died. The site featured Chainsaw Massacre role-playing, and police investigated claim from another user that they had discussed doing a murder with chainsaws with one or both Bakers. 2 men related to Elisa's previous husband, including Aaron Young, were accused of sexually assaulting Zara and striking her on the head, leading to her death. The cousins, James Young and Timothy Sammy Young, were investigated but passed polygraph tests and were not charged. Sammy Young was also alleged to have had a sexual relationship with Elisa, and the two had reportedly used illicit drugs together. Since no definitive cause of death could be determined, Zara Baker's death was ruled an undetermined violent homicide. Elisa Baker allegedly told police that both she and Adam Baker had disposed of Zara's remains, but cell phone data showed that only Elisa was in the area where the remains were found. Investigators believe that Elisa killed and dismembered Zara on September 24, 2010, and disposed of her remains the following day. On February 22, 2011, a Catawba County grand jury indicted Elisa Baker for second-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. The 5 aggravating factors cited were her history of physical, verbal, and psychological abuse of Zara, secretively hiding the child before and after the crime, desecrating Zara's body to hinder the investigation, Zara's young age and physical disability, and taking advantage of a position of trust. Elisa would have faced first-degree murder charges had she not cooperated by leading authorities to Zara's remains. Adam Baker has denied any involvement in Zara's death, and police found no credible evidence implicating him. Following the murder charge, Elisa Baker's bond was increased by $200,000, bringing her total bond to $307,700. In April 2011, Adam Baker was charged with identity theft and obtaining property under false pretenses. Authorities claimed he had used the identity and social security number of James Starbuck, the husband of Elisa's daughter Brittany, to get power connected to his apartment. Adam had previously faced charges including passing worthless checks, communicating threats, assault with a deadly weapon, and failure to return property. Following the new charges, Adam was ordered not to leave North Carolina without notifying the district attorney's office, to wear an electronic monitoring device on his ankle, and to meet weekly with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as he had hoped to return to Australia. Elisa Baker faced similar charges in February 2011 for identity theft and obtaining property under false pretenses. She allegedly used her daughter Brittany Starbuck's personal information in March 2010 to obtain telephone and utility services at a Caldwell County residence. In May 2011, she pleaded not guilty to 4 counts of identity theft. Additionally, in May 2011, Elisa was indicted on 7 federal drug charges for activities spanning May 2006 through October 2010. She had distributed prescription drugs including oxycodone, hydrocodone, and alprazolam from various addresses in Catawba and Caldwell counties. The charges included possession, distribution, and conspiracy to distribute prescription drugs, adding to over 20 previous unrelated charges. On June 2, 2011, she pleaded not guilty to all 7 federal drug charges, facing up to 20 years in prison for each count. On March 4, 2013, U.S. District Court Judge Richard Voorhees sentenced her to 120 months in prison for conspiracy with intent to distribute prescription drugs. Due to extensive publicity surrounding the case, Elisa's attorney, Scott Riley, requested a change of venue for her trial, initially scheduled in Catawba County. On August 1, 2011, Superior Court Judge Timothy Kincaid granted the request, with the final trial location set for September 12, 2011. On September 15, 2011, Elisa Baker pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 to 18 years in prison.